Listen carefully, because this story is full of shocking turns. If you don't watch till the very end, you'll miss the real twist that changes everything. Guaranteed, the deeper we go, the more unbelievable it gets. In 1962, George Maharis wasn't just another actor, he was at the absolute peak of his fame. His show Route 66 had made him a household name, a teen heartthrob, and a symbol of rebellion in American living rooms. Women adored him, men admired him, and producers believed they had found their perfect television star. But behind the cameras, a secret was about to surface, one that in the 1960s could end everything overnight. George's journey to fame was already extraordinary. Born in 1928 in Queens to Greek immigrant parents, he grew up in Hell's Kitchen, surrounded by crime and poverty, yet shielded by his father's small restaurant empire. That street education shaped his acting style years later, giving his characters an authenticity Hollywood couldn't fake. At first, George dreamed of being a singer. His voice had a richness that classmates admired, but too much strain destroyed his vocal cords before he ever had a real chance. Ironically, years later, when he became famous for acting, he recorded 6 albums anyway, and one of his songs even reached the Billboard Hot 100. It was as if destiny had cruelly taken one dream only to hand him another. His acting training came from the best, Sanford Meisner and Lee Strasberg. This was the golden era of method acting, when Brando and James Dean were rewriting the rules. Maharis absorbed it all, becoming known for his raw, dangerous performances. By the late 1950s, he was making waves off-Broadway, and in 1960, he leapt into Hollywood with Otto Preminger's Exodus. Fame was inevitable. But what came with it was deadly. By the time Route 66 hit television screens, George Maharis had everything a star needed. He had the looks, the grit, and thanks to Chevrolet, he even had the Corvette. Every season, the company gave the show a brand new model, and America fell in love, not just with the car, but with George behind the wheel. He wasn't just acting, he was embodying the restless spirit of the era. But in 1962, fate struck hard. Halfway through season 3, George collapsed with hepatitis. The grueling filming schedule, 12 to 15 hours a day, always on location, had pushed his body to the edge. One scene even forced him to stand for hours in freezing water, triggering a relapse. Doctors begged him to quit. One warned him bluntly, "Leave now, or you'll die." Imagine the pressure, Hollywood telling him to keep going, his health screaming otherwise. George tried to fight through, but every return made him weaker. The producers didn't believe him. They accused him of faking illness, of chasing movie deals, of betraying the show. They blocked him from appearances like The Ed Sullivan Show, and when he finally left, they painted him as selfish and unprofessional. This wasn't just conflict, it was character assassination. Behind the scenes, the truth was even darker. Producer Herbert B. Leonard had discovered George's secret: he was gay. In the 1960s, that was career suicide. To Leonard, it felt like betrayal. The romantic heartthrob, who was supposed to sell heterosexual fantasy, was living a life Hollywood refused to accept. From that moment, trust collapsed. Every meeting was poisoned with suspicion. George had become both sick and targeted. And when he finally walked away from Route 66, it wasn't just the end of a contract, it was the end of his stardom. But his battles were only beginning. After Route 66, George Maharis thought Hollywood would welcome him back. He was wrong. By the mid-1960s, his career had flatlined. Studio doors closed. Casting agents stopped calling. The rumors about his sexuality weren't just whispers anymore, they were knives in his back. In an industry built on image, George's was being carefully destroyed. Still, he tried to fight his way back. He landed a role in the film The Sword and the Sorcerer years later, but the damage had already been done. The man who once graced magazine covers now found himself typecast, sidelined, or ignored. Hollywood never forgave him for walking away from Route 66. And behind that grudge was an even harsher reality: they never forgave him for being who he was. Then came 1967. Police in Hollywood staged a sting operation, targeting men in gay bars and public restrooms. It was a time when just being suspected of being gay could end careers, families, lives. George Maharis was arrested. His mugshot splashed across papers, confirming the rumors his enemies had been spreading for years. Overnight, whatever chance he had left in mainstream Hollywood was gone. But here's the twist: George never denied who he was. He never gave interviews claiming it was a mistake or a setup, never tried to repair his straight image like so many others. In an era when silence was survival, George's quiet defiance was louder than any confession. He chose dignity over deception. And yet, the price was brutal. Offers disappeared. Invitations stopped. By the 1970s, George Maharis was almost invisible to the industry that once crowned him a star. But instead of fading into obscurity, he found a new way to fight back, a move that shocked everyone who thought he was finished. By the 1970s, George Maharis had every reason to give up. Hollywood had erased him, scandals had scarred his name, and the industry's fake smiles had turned to cold shoulders. But George wasn't the type to quietly disappear. If Hollywood slammed one door shut, he would break open another. He reinvented himself. Instead of begging for roles, he turned to art, his true passion. George was a gifted painter, and for the first time, he had the freedom to create without judgment. His work was bold, colorful, and unapologetically him. The man who once had to hide behind a carefully crafted image was now pouring his soul onto canvas, showing the world a side they had never seen. Collectors noticed. Galleries started displaying his work. Slowly, George carved out a new identity, not as an actor, but as an artist who refused to be silenced. But he didn't completely abandon the screen. Occasionally, he'd take on TV roles or guest appearances, enough to remind audiences that he was still there, still fighting, still unbroken. Each time he appeared, it was a small act of rebellion against the system that tried to erase him. What makes his story even more gripping is this: George Maharis was living a double revolution. In Hollywood, he had been punished for being himself. But outside, in the real world, times were changing. The gay rights movement was gaining strength. People were marching, protesting, demanding visibility. George didn't stand on the front lines with a megaphone, but by surviving, by refusing to deny his truth, he became a quiet symbol of resistance. And just when it seemed his legacy would be buried under scandal, history began to shift. The world that once condemned him was starting to catch up. But would it be enough to rewrite his story? In the last years of his life, George Maharis watched the world change in ways he never could have imagined during his prime. Hollywood, once so ruthless, began to rewrite its rules. LGBTQ+ actors who once hid in the shadows were now celebrated on magazine covers. The same industry that destroyed George for being himself was finally embracing the very thing it had punished him for. But for George, it was bittersweet. He had lived through the pain, the rejection, the loneliness, and now he was seeing a new generation walking through doors he helped crack open. What makes his story unforgettable is not just his rise, fall, and reinvention, but the courage behind it. He was a man trapped in an era that didn't allow him to live authentically, yet he still refused to completely disappear. He survived when others broke. He turned humiliation into art, rejection into quiet resilience, and left behind a legacy that Hollywood can never erase. When he passed away in 2023 at the age of 94, tributes poured in. Fans remembered not just the handsome star of Route 66, but the fighter who refused to let the system define him. His life became a symbol of how brutal, and how hypocritical, Hollywood could be. But it also became a reminder: no matter how much the world tries to silence you, truth finds a way to outlast the lies. So if you've watched this story till the end, you now know why George Maharis wasn't just another forgotten actor. He was a man who lived on the edge of scandal, on the wrong side of history, yet still carved out his place. And maybe, just maybe, the industry that buried him owes its progress to people like him.